Hey guys, I think we might be seeing a beautiful day, the beginning of the end of the MAGA movement. It's all going down in front of Judge Juan Marchand in a New York courtroom. And no, I'm not just talking about the Stormy Daniels hush money case with Donald Trump. I'm also talking about the very next trial. Bet you didn't know this. Steve Bannon is going to be on trial next, right after Donald Trump, starting May 25th for 3 serious felonies: 2 counts of money laundering, 1 count of criminal conspiracy. I predict that he will definitely be convicted. I'll explain why in the video coming up. The evidence is rock solid. 3 of his co-defendants have already been sentenced to jail terms in federal court. And this is going to be the destruction of MAGA. You're going to lose the propagandist, the mouthpiece, which is essential for any dictatorship or any totalitarian regime. And you're also going to get Donald Trump being convicted in his current case that's on trial right now. And if he's convicted, even if he doesn't go to jail, the polling shows MAGA goes down the toilet and circles into the drain, where it belongs, in the deep sewer of history. So sit down, let's watch. I've got a great video today. It's not only going to be about the individual players, but it's going to be metaphorical for how MAGA operates, how MAGA treats people, and what the outcome of MAGA is going to be long term. Let's hit it. Okay, it all started in 2019 when 2 regular guys not involved in the MAGA movement, not involved in politics, Brian Kolfage and Timothy Shea, came up with this idea called We Build the Wall. They're going to privately fundraise $25 million to help build a border wall on private land in Texas along the Rio Grande between America and Mexico. This was their idea. They always said from the very beginning, in every single communication, and after Steve Bannon and his friend Badolato got involved, he's kind of like the financial guy, that they would not take any money, zero, nothing, not a penny would be taken for salary, income, overhead, expenses, anything. And that was really the way they were able to do this, the way that they're able to stand out. They said it at fundraisers, they said it at rallies, they said it again online, in writing, over and over and over again. And what happened was, when they got overwhelmed because this thing raised $9 million on GoFundMe in like 2 days, they worked through some contacts, decided they needed some help, and they found Steve Bannon and this Bannon brought along this Badolato guy. And instead of actually doing what they promised they would do to induce these investments, these donations, Bannon came up with this idea, a pretty stupid one at that, to actually create a second set of books and records and bylaws and financial statements whereby money would be given through entities that Bannon controlled and owned, and then laundered over to everybody in this entity to pay them money. So basically, Bannon was the big architect. He's the guy that was in control of, stealing money from this entity. And also key, and most importantly, and this is what's really going to hit hard in front of the jury, the process of covering up the tracks, right? So obviously, you can't just take $1 million from an account of a nonprofit and just give it to Steve Bannon or just write a check to Brian Kolfage. Instead, it's got to be laundered, meaning it's got to appear that it was spent legitimately to wash it. That's what money laundering is. And what happened is he created a ton of fake invoices, fake books, fake records, fake receipts to make it look like work had been performed and money had been paid. Now, that's still a violation of the original solicitation that all the money was going to be put into the wall, but at least it makes it look like it wasn't a theft for personal benefit. In reality, all of those books and records, it's a huge long paper trail, were all proven and all shown quite easily, in fact, to be totally fraudulent. So what ended up happening is Bannon took about $1 million out through this process. Badolato got about 1.4. Shea got about 180,000, and Brian Kolfage got 350,000. Now, here's the key. When I say this is just like a MAGA situation and it's emblematic of how MAGA treats people, you got 4 people, including Kolfage, who had his legs and his arm blown off while he was in the Air Force in Iraq, a decorated, veteran. And who is the only one that Donald Trump pardons on his last day in office? Of course, Steve Bannon. He doesn't care about the guy who lost 3 of his 4 limbs, in a war for America, because he hates veterans, because they get adulation, they get respect from people, and that makes Donald Trump and his little tiny ego, his fragile little ego, feel insufficient. Bannon gets pardoned, but that only affects the federal crimes. And that's why Bannon is being charged in state court, and these other three guys, Kolfage, Badolato, and Shea, have all been convicted. Shea went to trial. He lost in front of a jury. They all had to pay back the money. Looks like Kolfage had to give back $17 million, and the other guys had to give back a significant amount of money. That was money they had control of, but hadn't spent yet. But at the end of the day, what you have are three gentlemen who either came up with or helped facilitate Steve Bannon making money off of this when Steve Bannon did absolutely nothing. And these guys are pissed because they're all been convicted. And what's happened too, as a practical matter, I can tell you, when you're an attorney and you go to trial, there's different themes, there's different stories, there's different ways of telling the story to the jury. And you don't know which one's going to work the best. You can pay for a mock jury or do something like that, but that's very expensive and time consuming, and it's not always 100% accurate, because you never know who's going to be in the jury pool and how that's going to play out. So they have been able to test drive this case 3 times, okay? And although that was the Justice Department at the federal level, and you have the state prosecutors in New York County, the New York County prosecutors obviously have talked to the Justice Department. They've read the transcripts. They know what works and what's not going to work. And so after, this is bite at the apple number 4. I promise you they're going to have a crisp, powerful, devastating case waiting for Steve Bannon. He's probably going to have these 3 guys testify against him. And let me tell you something. When you're sitting in New York City, New York County as a defendant, and there's a guy who's a war hero who's up there and has no legs and no arm, and he's the one who came up with an idea, and you're the defendant who basically used him to steal a bunch of money for yourself, I promise you that jury's going to hate your guts. And that's why I also think Steve Bannon has got a really, really pretty much impossible task in trying to get out of these charges. So that's everything we're talking about, kind of like what happened with it. Now, what the records and the evidence will be. Let's talk about these individual witnesses a little bit. We've talked about Brian Kolfage. He pled guilty. He's going to be a really bad witness for Bannon. Timothy Shea, he went to trial, and he got convicted. He's lost everything. And I've read actually their statements they made to the court at sentencing, because the transcripts are available if you have access to the court records, which I do. I'll actually post that in the description, because that's what I like to do on this channel. I don't just sit here and talk. I provide all the evidence in the background and provide stuff for you guys to look at and read and digest later that really kind of fills things out and answers any questions you might have. And these 2 guys were super pissed at Steve Bannon, which they should be, that they've lost everything and now they're going to prison. None of these guys had ever been in trouble before this. Then you got Badolato. This guy, okay, he's kind of scummy, but I kind of like him for this case, and here's why. Badolato is somebody who has already testified before in federal court in criminal cases against the mafia. And here's what happened. Badolato allegedly, and apparently, it seems it's true, I've read it in multiple news reports, borrowed money from a loan shark. It wasn't much, I think it was like 10 grand, at 500% interest. And of course, it's a loan shark, he doesn't have to comply with the law. And he didn't want to pay it back. So what did he do? When the loan shark started threatening him, which is what they do, Bolot goes to the FBI. He's like, hey, this mafia guy's threatening me to get out of paying the loan. And I probably never had to pay it back, but he went and testified against this guy, went to prison. And people who know Badolato have been interviewed in the press, and they say that this guy's records everything. He's always very cagey, and he keeps screenshots of text, and he keeps meticulous records and does things in case he later is going to need to incriminate someone else. So there's probably some really bad evidence out there. Now, that would have been produced in discovery already, but keep in mind, this is a guy who's pretty sharp when it comes to being, dealing in dirty matters and illegal matters. So if you look at all of this, you think about how Steve Bannon came along and he got all this information. He did nothing. He was brought into this framework of this fundraiser. And what happened? He made money basically based upon his name, and then he's the only one that got pardoned, which means he didn't really have to give the money back, okay? And he was able to get away with not paying taxes on all that extra money that he made, that $1 million. And the war veteran and everybody else, they get screwed. That's MAGA. MAGA screws the voters they're supposed to help. MAGA screws the people who are involved either working for Trump or in the campaign. There's a whole line of them who Trump later insults when he no longer needs them and says they're terrible. It's exactly what's going to happen to all the people who believe in MAGA. They're going to be disappointed. They're going to be discarded. They're going to be no longer relevant. And that's going to be the best justice of all for those who weren't innocently misled for a short period of time and then decided to wise up. But for the people who chose to be hateful and wrong and to put Donald Trump and the politics of the cultism before the country and the principles that gave them the beautiful life of being a person in America. Corruption, you're not talking about just the initial harm. The tentacles spread far and wide. A lot of damage, a lot of harm to a broad spectrum of people and institutions. That's exactly what happened here. So you have the $25 million that's raised pursuant to this We Build the Wall fundraiser, minus what was stolen, of course, by Bannon and his associates. And what happened was they found someone to build a wall, but he only built 3 miles for $25 million minus the stolen. Okay, so that's not much. I wish that was only the extent of the harm. It gets worse. This guy, his name's Tommy Fisher, who had no experience building border walls or anything like this. He's actually runs a company up in South Dakota that does like highway paving. He got in good with Trump, was able to get around a bunch of environmental regulations because Steve Bannon helped him. He probably paid him a bribe or something. And he got a contract for $2.7 billion, okay? So he had the initial contract for the We Build the Wall fundraiser that Steve Bannon stole from, okay? And built 3 miles of wall, then leapfrogged with the help of all these corrupt people to getting a $2.7 billion contract from the federal government during the Trump administration to build wall, over a much longer distance. The problem is the wall is totally defective. It only goes 2 feet into the ground. It causes crazy, massive erosion, and it's unstable and will probably blow out of the ground at some point in the near future. And that's what you're talking about when you're talking about MAGA, a grift that knows no limits and whose tentacles spread far and deep into the future to cause harm to subsequent administrations and people who had nothing to do with that initial fraud. So that's the overview. I hope I've given you a good perspective on what Steve Bannon is facing, what Steve Bannon did, how he screws over our veterans, what MAGA is about, and hopefully we can see MAGA end up in the same place that Steve Bannon's going to end up. He should get what amounts to effectively a life sentence. He's a very large, dirty, hairy, disgusting, awful person. His exterior appearance is frankly a reflection of the interior person that he actually is. And I expect 10 plus years in prison. So let's hope, let's pray for that. Steve Bannon is so critical to the MAGA movement. He's the mouthpiece where Kerry Lake goes, where Marjorie Taylor Greene goes, where J.D. Vance goes. All the worst people go on the Steve Bannon show and lie and lie and lie. Whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Ukrainian Nazis, Kerry Lake talking about how the election was allegedly stolen, or whether it's J.D. Vance making the outrageous BS lie that the Biden administration is going to gut Social Security and give that money to Ukrainians so that Zelensky can buy a yacht. Absolutely ridiculous, comical, defamatory. But he's going down. He's going to pay. Hey guys, I love you. Thanks for watching. We're going to have a lot more content on this channel. We're going to give you stuff that's different from other people in order to help democracy in America and abroad. Take care. Good night. God bless Ukraine. God bless America.